Do you see this toe? I'll be honest, I've been looking at it for days. Hundreds of balls, slow motion, frame by frame, screenshots, all of it. Sometimes just yelling, enhance, like I'm in an American movie looking for a serial killer. And I started to wonder, is this it? Have I found the root of all of Babar Azam's problem? Is it the toe that did it? Because Babar Azam has gone from being one of the best players in the world to someone who'd be dismissed when he was miming batting at a bus stop. If you blink as he takes guard, you might have missed him bat in both innings of a test match of recent times. This was a man who was on the road to greatness with the bat, and currently, he can't even find a run on a road. This was made using MV Players Insights. The same technology that supports the England and New Zealand test players is available to club cricketers as well. This is not the first time that Babar Azam has struggled in test match cricket. He strolled into ODI like a legend, and then he crawled into test like a baby entering a haunted house. After his debut in 2016, it wasn't until 2018 that he played the way we, expected. He scored his first 100 in his 17th match, but he more than made up for that when he got going, averaging 50, the magic number, at the end of 2022. Now he's dropped that by almost 5 runs in the last 8 test matches. Essentially, he's had a career of 3 parts so far. Until 2017, he was barely a replacement level batter. From 2018 to 22, he was quite simply one of the best batters in the world. And then from 2023 onwards, it seems like he's gone all the way back to square one. How does that happen? How can someone be both this good and this bad? The common theme here is that he struggled at home and away in those periods where he averaged less. Naturally, he cashes in more at home and the UAE, but also more than holds up on the road during his purple patch years. Before you say it must have been against weak teams, he averaged over 50 in England and Australia, although with a smallish sample size. And ironically, he scored 2 runs in as many innings when he was playing against Zimbabwe. However, the home and away thing still makes some sense, because the modern day batter his career is most like is probably Marnus Labuschagne. Both of them are amongst the top batters in the world during the pace-playing pandemic of 2018 to 2022. And when we look at their overall careers so far, they average really high at home, but mid-30s away. However, from that 18 to 22 period, Babar had the 3rd most runs behind Root and Stokes. And amongst batters with at least 1,000 of them, Kane Williamson and Labuschagne were the only guys who averaged more. So this isn't all from scoring on incredible flat pitches in Pakistan, since his away average in this period is north of 47. And in that time, only 4 batters have a match factor of above 1.5, and Babar is one of them. So he was 62% better than the rest of the top 6 batters from both teams in the matches he played in. That doesn't suggest he was just on a bunch of good wickets, because no one else was anywhere near the levels he was attaining on them. Of course, it does let you know that he did a lot of his best work without any support from other Pakistani batters. He has 1,000 more runs than Azhar Ali in this period, and it wasn't until 2022 that Saud Shakil and Abdullah Shafiq provided some support. Mohammad Rizwan, who averaged just under 39, had periods of ups and downs and was dropped at one point. And of course, Imam Al-Haq cannot score a run outside of Rawalpindi. So if it wasn't home or flat pitches, what the hell has been going on with Babar Azam? And a good way of looking at form with batters is to look at control percentage first. Kartikeya Date mentions this in an article that luck is not the opposite of skill. It just represents the gap between the average outcome and the eventual outcome. So when Babar started in Test cricket, he was actually quite unlucky because his control percentages were good. From 2018 to 2022, he was naturally in a lot more control. And if you look closely, his mark was a little bit low in 2021. That was the year he averaged in the 30s. But here's the interesting bit. His control percentage has actually reduced in his latest form slump. If you watched him bat in the series against Bangladesh, you don't need control percentages to tell you that he was out of form. And it wasn't just a case of him getting starts and then not going on to make big scores. So when he started out, he got out once every 6.3 false shots. The global average is around 10, so he was definitely unlucky. During his high-scoring years, he naturally played more false shots before getting out because he was in for a long period of time. And now his false shot percentage has come down to 10 in the last year and a half. So some of what has happened to him is just regressing to a mean. But the thing is that Babar is not like a regressing to the mean kind of player. He's never had a year where he's averaged like around 40, which is a normal thing for a top 6 player to do. He's either had mountainous highs or valley lows. If you look at Babar Azam's entire first-class career, you get an even better understanding of what's going on here. He starts off his career not making any runs, then he makes an absolute ton of runs and gets selected for the national team where he doesn't make any runs. Then he goes on to completely dominate for a couple of years, but he has 1 year in that where he doesn't make any runs anymore. Then he goes back to the level he was at previously before now being in a complete and utter nosedive. He really is one of the least consistent, high-quality batters I've ever looked at. And it's worth mentioning a couple of other guys who had similar kind of run-scoring patterns in their careers, because this is not how most professional batters look. Mike Hussey's career was really weird. If we look at his early first-class career, he actually started like a future Australian player, and then he was dropped by Western Australia. So he ended up spending a bunch of years struggling, and then suddenly he unlocked a huge level that he carried all the way into Test cricket. And then he averaged over 70 in his first 3 years, only to have a sudden dip where he averaged mid-30s for a couple of years, and then he averaged pretty much 50 for the rest of his career. Mike Hussey had a mix of brilliant and mediocre years. And we can go back further as well. Dennis Compton averaged over 40 from 1937 to 1949 every year. For the next 4 years, he was an absolute shadow of that. And it looked like his career was gone forever, only to rediscover that form and average over 55 for the next 3 years. And then for the last year of his career, he averaged only 25. Compton experienced severe peaks and troughs. We've seen these kinds of peaks and troughs before, and one of the reasons that they sometimes happen is for players who can't actually convert 50s to 100s that much. Babar Azam has crossed 50 35 times in Test cricket, but he's only scored 900s from that, and that's a big issue that he's had away from home. But while that explains some of it, I think there's a much bigger issue here. We talk about rhythm bowlers like Mohammad Siraj, Stuart Broad, or Shamar Joseph, who on their days are absolutely unplayable, but generally a lot more inconsistent. That's just something that we mention a lot. But the more I talk to batters, the more I realise that some operate in a very similar way. Compton, Babar and Hussey can be great, but they can also be kind of trash. They are cluster batters. And I've kind of always believed in this style of player, that there are certain batters who kind of find a rhythm of their batting, then they make a ton of runs, or tons even, but they can't always explain why. And so when something goes wrong, they don't know how to fix it. So you have players like Sachin Tendulkar who could probably tell if their left shoulder is like a millimetre out of line. But for many batters, they can't always tell you the exact mechanics of what makes them the player that they are. Take Usman Khawaja, who is obviously a very smart player. I mean, he can like fly a plane and stuff, right? He should be able to work out his game. And yet you look at his first-class career, and this isn't just his Test career. We put first-class in here. He comes flying out of the block, pun intended. And then he can't find a run anywhere. Finally, he gets his groove back before losing it all again. And then when he regains form, he becomes one of the best players in the world. And this year, well, it seems like maybe a slide is possible again. So Usman Khawaja is either a great Test batter or an ordinary first-class player. And even he probably couldn't explain 100% why this keeps happening. Because if players could bottle that, they would. And the greatest run scorers of all time do. The players just below that quite often can't work it out. So when things are going well for them, they score in clusters, and then they fail, also, I suppose, in clusters. So it is very possible that Babar Azam is clueless to exactly the mechanics of his batting when he's making runs, and then also when he's not. So my question is, how do you fix what you never truly understood anyway? But the other side of this is maybe that toe I mentioned at the start. Maybe it's something as small as the toe, or I suppose a collection of toes, or his whole foot. Because after quite a bit of MV play research looking at his many innings over a long period of his career, I did find that toe. You can see that in 2017 and 19, just after the ball was released, he has an open stance. So essentially what that means is his back foot is facing point, but his front foot is more like facing cover. And if you drew a straight line from his feet, it would go to mid-on. Having a look at some of the footage from the PSL, you can see it's quite different now. If you drew a straight line from his feet, it would probably go more towards the non-striker. And that front foot is now pretty much pointing towards cover as well. He's completely closed himself off. And even so, I'm putting a lot of lines and everything up on the screen to show you all this, but it's a pretty small change, right? It took me a while to work this out. And it's very possible that he didn't even notice he did this, or that he actually did it to overcome another issue, like reaching for balls outside off stump. And sometimes what happens is you make a small change to your technique and you start to make runs straight away, so you think you've fixed it. You don't realize you've actually brought in other issues that will come up later. But essentially what this means is he's much more of a one-eyed batter now than a two-eyed batter, which I understand all batters have two eyes, but I'm not going to explain that now. So it means he's staying close to the balls outside off stump, but he's closed off a lot more and much more of an LBW candidate because of it. So the only way to check that is to look at his dismissals. and the percentage of LBW and ball dismissals has now increased significantly. A potential reason for this could be that he was dismissed in the slips or keeper region 21 times from 2018 to 2022, so he might have been trying to fix that. And also having his feet in the position he has at the moment might have affected his balance because it doesn't look as natural as it did beforehand. I mean, Bubba used to be really smooth at the crease, and now he looks like someone hopping on one leg after 24 hours without sleep. But that's seam. What about spin? Because it's been quite notable that he struggled with facing left-arm orthodox spinners in red ball cricket of recent times. In his golden period, Bubba was dismissed 8 times by slow left-armers, but he averaged a healthy 77 while doing it. Since the start of 2023, he's been dismissed 4 times in the 6 innings he's faced left-arm finger spinners and is averaging 14.5 runs per dismissal. He's got the KP bug, only worse. And the problem again appears to be that toe, or the front foot. It doesn't actually come across to be level with his back foot at all. Against spin, his foot is moving so far that he's actually completely closed off before he faces a ball. And the interesting thing is, watching the MV play footage of him, I could see that the balls where he didn't actually make this movement, he played quite well. Whereas once he started to move that foot across too early, he suddenly looked like he'd never seen spin before. And it's so hard to play across your front pad as the ball is spinning away from you. And sometimes he will move right across his stumps before the ball is bowled, meaning that the ball is actually pitched inside his leg. He's basically started playing the ball behind his back a little bit, which is no one's idea of a good time. He's adding a degree of difficulty here that he does not need to do. And if you're right-handed, you're going to face a lot of left-arm finger spin. But he's also a lot more vulnerable to right-arm pace at the moment, which is a real problem because that's the thing you face by far the most. During his peak, he averaged 48.6 against it. And those are very good, solid numbers, especially when we consider he faced it in Australia, England, South Africa, and the West Indies. But since 2023, he's been dismissed 7 times versus right-arm pace, 18.3 runs per dismissal. In his defense, it's a lot harder to face them in Test cricket in recent times, except for one thing. He was completely dominating this kind of bowling in wobble ball, and suddenly now he can barely play it. So again, we can't really blame the pitches because he was doing really well on the pitches beforehand. But how about this? Good length deliveries are the toughest delivery a batter can face. But here's where it gets fun. At his peak, he was dominating them, averaging well over 50. That kind of number makes you think that he'd figured out the hardest delivery in the game. But then, when his form dips, his lean patches align almost perfectly with his struggle against good length balls. Now, there has to be an element of being away from Pakistan's flat pitches here. But he was absolutely brutal against the most used ball in Test cricket before, and now it owns him. And let's just pivot back to Marnus Labuschagne for a moment. Because remember I said that their Test careers were pretty similar. Well, Bubba is about 4 months younger than Marnus, and they've both played about 50-odd Test matches. And, of course, they both average in the mid-40s, dipping after prolific periods in the middle part of their careers. But there is one major difference. Marnus, who was a bit of a late bloomer to cricket, if we're being honest, has played red ball cricket for a decade and has taken to the field 152 times. Bubba, who made his first-class debut 4 years before Marnus, has actually only played in 91 red ball matches. And so possibly in Babar Azam, we are seeing the first generation of players who just haven't worked on their red ball game enough. I mean, going back to the 1950s and 60s, England county players used to play around 90 first-class matches in 3 seasons. Clearly 91 isn't enough long-format cricket for a professional batter who is nearing the age of 30. And timeout in the middle is what Bubba desperately needs. He's obviously a smart, talented, and usually a technically correct player. If he was playing a bunch of first-class cricket, or just long innings in general, he might even be able to subconsciously fix his issue. And of course, not playing enough of that doesn't help. But the other thing is, it wasn't that long ago that he was on the trajectory of an all-timer in ODI cricket. He could have fixed it there. But his ODI form has also dipped. Not quite to the same level of his Test cricket, but still. He averages 46 since the start of 2023, striking at 84, which is not too shabby for like a human. But before then, Babar Azam was averaging over 60 in ODI cricket. It's also worth pointing out that Pakistan just have not played a lot of ODI cricket. He's not facing a lot of balls. He's playing a little bit of Test cricket and a little bit of franchise cricket. But we've talked about the technical stuff and how much cricket he's played and all these different factors. What about form and cluster batters and pitches and his big toe and all the different kinds of technical stuff? What about politics as a contributing factor? As Usman Samiuddin said recently, the PCB might have actually outdone themselves when it comes to shit hitting the fan, even by their own chaotic standards. We can all say that Babar is out of form, but how many PCB officials have ever been in as good a form as his current slot? Babar not making a run is still better than most of the guys who've ever been decision makers at the PCB. Since the end of 2022, there have been 4 different chairpersons of the PCB, owing to the political quagmire within Pakistan cricket, which is for another video on another day. In that same period, 7 different individuals have been a coach at different times of the men's national team. And there have also been 5 different chief selectors. And we hear a lot about how Babar doesn't trust easily. Why would he? The PCB leaks like a sieve, and their main skill is blaming someone else. I am surprised he is not locked up in his hotel room with the door up against the handle in most situations. He has been on his own as a batter, a captain, while a revolving door of people have just come through with their own agendas. Has any batting coach even been around long enough to bond with him emotionally, let alone bring up this big toe issue? And also, somehow he has been crowded and isolated at the same time. And Babar has been at the centre of this power struggle, given that he was the all-format captain until the end of the 2023 World Cup. And like any person anywhere, how do you fix your own technical problems when you've got daily questions over the rest of your job? And the truth is that Pakistan can survive without Babar Azam's captaincy, but not without his runs. So if this is not what I think and another blip before a bucket load of runs, and it's the end of something really important, Pakistan have lost something incredibly special here. Because once you have batted at the level that Babar Azam got to, there's no replacement player who can come in and do that. Babar Azam is special. And so if you can reach those heights once, the hope is that he can reach those heights again. Of course, the good and bad news for Pakistan cricket is that Babar's batting is perhaps still more stable than anything that goes on at the PCB. But whether this is about his giant toe or the politics or just something else entirely, when it comes down to it, it doesn't matter. Pakistan just need Babar Azam to make runs. I have a book out with Abhishek Mukherjee, and it is called Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. And it's about the stories of how each team beat England for the first time. We go all the way back to the demon Fred Spofforth getting annoyed at W.G. Grace for acting a little bit like Alex Carey. And then we come all the way to present times with Rashid Khan's England's redemption. We cover every single team to beat England in a major international, but we also talk about the incredible stories like the barefoot basher from Fiji that almost played for New Zealand. In fact, this book is full of tales like that, like how Pakistan lost a top batter after he was on the run from an angry husband of a movie star he was having an affair with, and also how one future captain of his nation realised he might have to go out and bat at Lords and that he didn't own his own pads. Cricket was used as a tool by the empire, but what happens when those nations grow up and get good at it? Find Overthrowing Cricket's Empire on Amazon today.